Helena Vasconcelos built a billion-dollar empire, but love had always eluded her, until Eduardo. When she discovers he's hiding something about his family, she goes undercover as their maid to uncover the truth. What she hears changes everything. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Helena Vasconcelos's penthouse apartment. At 45, Helena had built an empire from scratch, transforming a small inheritance into a billion-dollar hospitality chain spanning 3 continents. Despite her wealth, she preferred simplicity, her dark hair cut in a practical bob, her wardrobe elegant but understated. "Ms. Vasconcelos, your coffee," said Maria, her housekeeper of 15 years, placing a steaming mug on the glass table. "Thank you, Maria." Helena smiled warmly. Unlike many of her wealthy peers, Helena treated her staff with genuine respect. She knew what it was like to work hard. Her fortune hadn't been handed to her on a silver platter. Her phone buzzed with a message from Eduardo Nogueira, the man who had unexpectedly stolen her heart 6 months ago after they met at a charity gala. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight. Missing you already." Helena's heart fluttered like a teenager's. At 45, she'd begun to think romance wasn't in the cards for her anymore. 3 failed relationships had left her wary, especially after discovering each man had been more interested in her bank account than her heart. But Eduardo felt different. At 40, he was charming, educated, and most importantly seemed unfazed by her wealth. He worked as a university professor, passionate about literature and history. When they'd first met, he hadn't even known who she was. "Is that Eduardo again?" Maria asked with a knowing smile. "You're glowing whenever he texts." "Is it that obvious?" Helena laughed, tucking her phone away. "It's nice to see you happy, Ms. Vasconcelos. You deserve it." Helena nodded, but a small worry nagged at her. Despite dating for 6 months, Eduardo always found excuses when she suggested meeting his family. They were traditional, simple people, he'd say. They might feel intimidated by your success. It wasn't that she doubted his feelings, but his reluctance made her uneasy. Was he ashamed of her, or was there something else? "Maria, what would you do if you were dating someone for months but still hadn't met their family?" Helena asked suddenly. Maria thought for a moment. "I'd wonder why. Family tells you a lot about a person." Helena nodded. "Exactly what I was thinking." Later, that day in her corner office overlooking the city skyline, Helena tried to focus on work, but Eduardo's family situation kept distracting her. Her assistant, Carol, knocked on the open door. "Your 1 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Carol." Helena closed the file she'd been pretending to read. "And could you free up my schedule for Friday afternoon? I need some personal time." "Of course." "Everything okay? Just need to solve a mystery." Helena replied with a tight smile. That evening, at an upscale restaurant downtown, Eduardo greeted her with a kiss. "You look stunning," he said, pulling out her chair. Helena studied his face, the warm brown eyes, the salt and pepper at his temples. Was she overthinking things? Maybe his family was exactly as he described, simple people who might feel uncomfortable around someone of her status. "Eduardo," she began after they'd ordered, "I've been thinking. We've been together 6 months now, and I still haven't met your family." His smile faltered slightly. "Helena, we've talked about this. They're not like us, they live simply. And you think I'd judge them for that? You know me better." Eduardo reached for her hand. "Of course not. It's just, they might feel out of place. My mother makes tamales for the local market. My father, retired from the postal service. My sister works at a department store. And you think I'd look down on honest work? My father was a mechanic, Eduardo. I'm not some spoiled heiress." I know. He squeezed her hand. "Maybe soon. They're having a dinner party next Friday, my sister's birthday." Helena's interest piqued. "Perfect, I'd love to attend." Eduardo shook his head. "It's a small family thing, very casual." "I can do casual," she insisted. "I want to know the people who raised the man I love." Eduardo looked uncomfortable but nodded slowly. "Let me talk to them first, I'll let you know." Later that night, as Eduardo dropped her off at her building, he kissed her goodbye with his usual passion. But something felt off. The way he dodged her questions about his family dinner troubled her. "I love you," he said, stroking her cheek. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it. But as she watched him drive away, the nagging feeling returned. The next morning, Helena made a decision. She cancelled her meetings and called her most trusted friend, Sophia. "I need your help with something unorthodox," Helena explained over coffee in her apartment. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "This sounds interesting already." "Eduardo is hiding. Something about his family. They're having a dinner party on Friday and he's reluctant to include me. So you want to crash the party?" Helena smiled. "Not exactly. I want to observe them first. See how they talk about me when I'm not there." Sophia's eyes widened. "Helena Vasconcelos, are you suggesting what I think you are?" "I need to know the truth, Sophia. I can't marry a man if his family has ulterior motives. I've been there before. And how exactly do you plan to spy on them?" Helena sipped her coffee. "Eduardo mentioned his mother hires extra help for parties. What if I became that help?" Sophia nearly choked. "You want to pretend to be household staff? Have you lost your mind?" "It's the only way to hear the unfiltered truth." Sophia set down her cup. "Let me get this straight. You, one of the most recognizable businesswomen in the country, want to disguise yourself as a maid to spy on your boyfriend's family." "I'll wear a wig. Glasses. They've never seen me, not even a photo. Eduardo is private about our relationship. Online." "This is insane," Sophia said, but her expression changed to one of reluctant approval. "But also brilliant. If they're after your money, they'll reveal themselves when talking about you." "Exactly." Helena felt a mixture of guilt and determination. "I need to know if Eduardo is the real thing." Over the next few days, Helena prepared meticulously. She contacted a staffing agency under a false name and arranged to be sent to the Noguera residence on Friday. She purchased a plain black uniform, sensible shoes, and a dark wig that completely changed her appearance. With minimal makeup and glasses she didn't need, even Maria barely recognized her during a practice run. When Friday arrived, Helena's stomach was in knots. "This is crazy," she muttered to herself as Sophia drove her to the Noguera family home in a modest but respectable neighborhood. The house was larger than she expected, not luxurious, but comfortable, with a well-maintained garden. "Last chance to back out," Sophia said, pulling up a block away. Helena shook her head. "I need to know. Call me if anything goes wrong. I'll be nearby." Helena nodded, gave her friend a quick hug, and made her way to the house, carrying a small bag with cleaning supplies for authenticity. Mrs. Noguera answered the door, a plump woman in her 60s with Eduardo's brown eyes. "You must be from the agency," she said, looking Helena up and down. "Come in, the guests arrive in 3 hours and there's much to do." Helena nodded, keeping her eyes lowered. "Yes, ma'am. Where would you like me to start?" "The living room needs dusting and then help in the kitchen." Helena set to work, moving quietly through the house. It was comfortably furnished, with family photos everywhere. She paused at one showing Eduardo as a child, grinning with missing front teeth. Her heart ached with love for him, making her question her deception. But then the voices from the kitchen caught her attention. "Is she coming tonight?" a female voice asked. "Eduardo's sister, Luisa," Helena guessed. "No," Eduardo said, "she's busy. With work, as usual." Mrs. Noguera's tone was disapproving. "I still can't believe my brother is dating one of the richest women in the country," Luisa continued. "Have you seen her house? It was featured in that magazine." Helena froze, duster in hand, listening intently. "Money isn't everything," Mrs. Noguera replied. "These rich women, they're used to getting their way. How long before she gets bored with our Eduardo? He's not exactly in her social circle." "Mom, he's been dating her for months. Maybe she genuinely likes him." Mrs. Noguera scoffed. "Likes him until someone better comes along. Women like that, they see men as accessories." Helena felt her cheeks burn. This was exactly what she'd feared. "Dad, what do you think?" Luisa asked, as an older man entered the kitchen. Mr. Noguera sighed heavily. "I think Eduardo should be careful. Hearts get broken when people from different worlds get together, and usually it's not the rich one who ends up hurt. But if they truly love each other," Luisa began. Love doesn't pay the bills, Mrs. Noguera interrupted. And what happens when she decides our family isn't good enough for her? Eduardo will be devastated. Helena moved closer to the kitchen door, trying to hear more clearly. They weren't gold diggers as she'd feared, but they clearly believed she'd eventually reject Eduardo because of their different social standings. The front door opened, and Helena heard Eduardo's voice. She quickly turned back to her dusting, heart pounding. Eduardo walked into the living room, then stopped abruptly when he saw her. For a terrifying moment, Helena thought he'd recognized her despite the disguise. "Oh, hello," he said politely. "You must be helping with the party." Helena nodded without looking up, relieved but also hurt that he hadn't recognized the woman he claimed to love. "Eduardo, come here," his mother called from the kitchen. Helena moved closer to the doorway, pretending to clean while straining to hear. "I saw this," Mrs. Noguera said. Helena peered around the corner to see her holding up a glossy magazine. On the cover was Helena at a recent charity event, elegant in a designer gown. "You're Helena. It says here she's dating a mystery man. That's you, isn't it?" Eduardo shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, please. Yes, that's me, but I've asked her to keep our relationship private." "Ashamed of us?" his father asked pointedly. "Of course not. It's just complicated." Mrs. Noguera placed a hand on Eduardo's arm. "Son, we worry. This Helena, she's not just wealthy, she's from another world. What happens when the novelty wears off?" "It's not like that," Eduardo protested. "Helena isn't what you think. She's kind, generous, down to earth." "So why haven't you brought her to meet us?" his mother persisted. Eduardo ran a hand through his hair. Because I was afraid you'd judge her before knowing her. Or worse, that you'd think I was with her for her money." Helena's heart softened slightly. "So that was part of it, are you?" his father asked bluntly. "Dad?" Eduardo looked shocked. "How can you ask that?" Mr. Noguera shrugged. "It's a fair question. She's worth billions. You teach literature for a modest salary. The world will wonder. I don't care what the world thinks, I love her." His mother sighed. "Love isn't always enough, Eduardo. What about children? Would she want them at her age? And if you marry, would you sign a prenup? These are practical concerns." "We haven't discussed marriage yet," Eduardo replied, his voice tight. "But you've thought about it," Luisa said. It wasn't a question. Eduardo didn't deny it. "I want to be with her, but yes, the differences in our circumstances have made me cautious." His mother nodded, as they should. "I just don't want to see you hurt when she realizes a university professor doesn't fit into her jet-setting life." Helena had heard enough. She moved back into the living room, her mind whirling. They weren't conspiring to get her money. They were protecting Eduardo from what they perceived as inevitable heartbreak. But didn't Eduardo see how wrong they were? Didn't he know her better than that? As she dusted the mantelpiece, she accidentally knocked over a small vase. It crashed to the floor, bringing everyone running from the kitchen. "I'm so sorry," Helena gasped, kneeling to pick up the pieces. "It's all right," Eduardo said kindly, bending to help. "It was just a vase." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Helena thought recognition flickered in his expression. She quickly looked away. "I'll pay for it from my wages," she said, disguising her voice slightly. "Nonsense," Eduardo replied. "Accidents happen." His kindness to someone he thought was just a cleaning lady touched her. This was the man she'd fallen in love with, considerate regardless of someone's status. But as the family returned to the kitchen, Helena heard Mrs. Noguera mutter, "I bet Helena Vasconcelos doesn't have to worry about breaking things. She can just buy replacements." Eduardo said nothing to contradict his mother's perception of her, and that silence hurt more than anything else she'd heard. The doorbell rang, announcing the first guests. Helena continued her charade, serving drinks and appetizers while listening to conversations around her. Eduardo's friends and extended family seemed nice, normal people, but the comments about his rich girlfriend continued throughout the evening. Some were curious, others skeptical, a few outright disapproving. And while Eduardo defended their relationship, he never fully corrected their misconceptions about her character. As the party wound down, Helena's disappointment and anger grew. Not at his family, Their concerns came from love and protective instincts, but at Eduardo. He claimed to love her, but had failed to truly see her or represent her accurately to those who mattered to him. In the kitchen, washing glasses, Helena overheard a final conversation that broke her heart. "Son," Mr. Noguera said quietly to Eduardo, "I just want you to be careful. If this relationship ends, you'll have nothing to fall back on. Dad, I told you I'm not with Helena for her money. I believe you, but you should be practical. Has she offered to help with your student loans, your mortgage?" Eduardo hesitated. "She's mentioned it. I've declined." "Maybe you shouldn't," his father suggested. "If she wants to help, it would be foolish to refuse. Just in case things don't work out, you should have something to show for the relationship." Helena froze, the glass in her hand nearly slipping. Was Eduardo's father actually advising him to take advantage of her financially? And worse, Eduardo didn't immediately reject the idea. He just stood there, silent. It was that silence that decided her. Helena carefully placed the glass on the counter, untied her apron, and walked straight into the dining room where the family had gathered for cake. With steady hands, she removed her wig and glasses. The room fell silent as recognition dawned. On their faces, "Helena?" Eduardo gasped, his face draining of color. "Yes, Eduardo, it's me." Her voice was calm despite the storm inside her. "I wanted to meet your family. Now I have." Mrs. Noguera looked mortified. "Ms. Vasconcelos, we had no idea." Helena raised a hand. "I've heard enough tonight to understand how you all see me, as some rich woman playing with Eduardo's heart. As someone who couldn't possibly appreciate him for who he is." She turned to Eduardo, tears threatening. "But you know me, Eduardo. Or I thought you did. Yet, you let them believe I'm some shallow socialite who would discard you when bored." "Helena, please." Eduardo stepped toward her. "I can explain." Your silence explained everything. Helena removed the engagement ring he'd given her just a week ago. A simple diamond she'd cherished because it represented his love, not his bank account. "I would have loved your family as my own. But I can't be with someone who doesn't truly believe in me." She placed the ring on the table, her heart breaking. "Goodbye, Eduardo." As she walked toward the door, she heard him calling after her. But her mind was made up. She stepped into the night, letting her tears fall at last, knowing she deserved someone who would defend her character even when she wasn't in the room. Someone who truly knew her heart. The sun was just beginning to rise as Helena sat on her balcony, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She hadn't slept all night. The events from the Noguera family dinner played over and over in her mind like a bad movie she couldn't turn off. "Ms. Vasconcelos." Maria appeared at the door, concern etched on her face. "You're up early." Helena managed a weak smile. "I never went to sleep, Maria. The dinner with Eduardo's family, as it didn't go well." A bitter laugh escaped Helena's lips. "You could say that." She turned to look at her loyal housekeeper. "I went undercover as cleaning staff." Maria's eyes widened. "You did what?" "I know, it sounds crazy." Helena rubbed her temples. "But I had to know the truth." Maria sat down beside her. In 15 years, they'd moved beyond employer and employee to something closer to family. "And what truth did you find?" "That Eduardo's family thinks I'm a shallow, rich woman who will eventually break their son's heart." Helena's voice caught. "And Eduardo, he didn't defend me. Not really." "I'm so sorry," Maria said softly. "You deserve better." The phone rang for the 20th time since last night. Eduardo again. Helena ignored it. "He's called all night," she explained to Maria. "Left messages, texts. I can't talk to him yet." "Maybe you should hear what he has to say," Maria suggested gently. Helena shook her head. "What could he possibly say? I was there, Maria. I heard everything." The doorbell rang, startling them both. "That better not be him," Helena muttered. Maria went to check and returned looking uncomfortable. "It's not Eduardo, it's his sister, Luisa." Helena stiffened. "What does she want?" "She says she needs to speak with you, that it's important." Helena sighed deeply. "Send her in." Luisa Noguera entered the room hesitantly. She was younger than Eduardo, maybe mid-30s, with the same warm brown eyes. Today those eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "Ms. Vasconcelos," she began awkwardly. "I'm sorry to intrude. I got your address from Eduardo's phone while he was in the shower." "Why are you here, Luisa?" Helena asked, too emotionally drained. "For pleasantries. To apologize and to explain." Luisa twisted her hands nervously. "What you heard last night, it wasn't the whole story." Helena gestured to the chair across from her. "I'm listening." Luisa sat down, clearly uncomfortable in the luxurious surroundings. "Our family has a complicated history with wealth. My father's sister married a rich man who looked down on all of us. He eventually forced her to cut ties with us completely." "I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "Please let me finish," Luisa interrupted. "Then my mother's brother fell in love with his boss's daughter. She used him, broke his heart, and fired him when she got bored. These experiences shaped how my parents view relationships across different social classes." Helena's expression softened slightly. "That explains their attitudes. It doesn't excuse Eduardo's silence." "Eduardo has been fighting these prejudices since you two met," Luisa insisted. "He talks about you constantly, how kind you are, how you built your company from nothing, how you treat everyone with respect regardless of their position. Yet he let your parents believe I'm some rich snob who will discard him." Luisa shook her head. "No, he's been trying to change their minds for months. That's why he was hesitant to introduce you. He wanted to break down their preconceptions." First, Helena took a deep breath, processing this new information. "Even if that's true, your father suggested Eduardo should take financial advantage of me, just in case." And Eduardo said nothing. Luisa winced. "That was terrible, I know. But you left before seeing what happened next." Helena raised an eyebrow, curious despite herself. "After you left, Eduardo was furious. He told our father he was ashamed of him, said he'd never take a penny from you, and was insulted that Dad would even suggest it." Luisa leaned forward. "He loves you, Ms. Vasconcelos, not your money, you." Helena wanted to believe her, but the wound was still too fresh. "If he loved me, as you say, he would have defended me more strongly from the beginning. He's been defending you for months," Luisa insisted. "Last night he was caught off guard. He never imagined you'd be there, hearing everything." "That's exactly the problem," Helena replied. "People show their true character when they think no one is watching." Luisa stood up, frustration evident in her posture. "My brother isn't perfect, but he loves you. Right now he's devastated. He hasn't slept or eaten since you left." "I need time to think," Helena said finally. "He wants to see you, to explain in person." Helena shook her head. "Not yet. I need space." Luisa nodded reluctantly. "I understand. But please don't throw away something real because of our family's issues." She pulled a small envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. "He asked me to give you this. Read it when you're ready." After Luisa left, Helena stared at the envelope but couldn't bring herself to open it. Instead, she called Sophia, who arrived 30 minutes later. "You look terrible," Sophia said bluntly, giving Helena a hug. "I've been worried sick." Helena filled her in on Luisa's visit and the letter. "What should I do?" Sophia picked up the envelope. "Read it for starters." "I'm not ready." "Then I'll read it to you." Before Helena could protest, Sophia opened the envelope and began reading aloud. "Helena, my love, by now you must hate me, and I don't blame you. What you witnessed last night was my greatest failure, not standing up for the woman I love when it mattered most. There are no excuses, only explanations if you'll hear them. My family carries deep wounds from past experiences that have colored their view of relationships between different social classes. I've spent months trying to show them who you really are, the compassionate, down-to-earth woman I fell in love with. I thought I was making progress, but last night proved I failed. When my father suggested I take financial advantage of you, I was so shocked I couldn't speak. After you left, I told him I was ashamed of him and that I would never exploit you that way. But that doesn't erase my silence when you were there to hear it. I understand if you can't forgive me. But please know that I love you for who you are, not what you have. I've never cared about your money. If anything, I worried it would make you doubt my intentions. If you're willing to give me another chance, I promise I will never fail to defend you again, whether you're in the room or not. You deserve nothing less. All my love, Eduardo." Sophia looked up from the letter. "Well, What do you think? Helena brushed away a tear. I don't know what to think anymore. Do you love him? Yes, Helena admitted. But love isn't always enough. The days that followed were a blur of work and sleepless nights. Helena threw herself into business, reviewing contracts and attending meetings on autopilot, while her heart remained tied in knots. Eduardo continued calling and texting. After a week, the messages became less frequent, but more heartfelt. He wasn't giving up, but he was giving her the space she'd requested. 2 weeks after the dinner fiasco, Helena was reviewing quarterly reports in her office when Carol knocked on the door. There's someone here to see you, she said hesitantly. Helena didn't look up from her papers. I don't have any appointments this afternoon. It's Mrs. Nogueira, Eduardo's mother. Helena's head snapped up. Eduardo's mother is here. Carol nodded. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Helena considered sending her away, but curiosity won out. Send her in. Mrs. Nogueira looked out of place in Helena's sleek, modern office. She clutched her purse nervously, her eyes darting around at the expensive artwork and panoramic city views. Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Vasconcelos, she began, her voice tight with tension. Please sit down. Helena gestured to the chair across from her desk. What can I do for you, Mrs. Nogueira? The older woman sat stiffly, gathering her courage. I've come to apologize. What you overheard in my home, it was wrong. We judged you without knowing you. Helena kept her expression neutral. Why the change of heart? Because I've seen what losing you has done to my son. Mrs. Nogueira's eyes filled with tears. Eduardo hasn't been himself. He doesn't eat, barely, sleeps. And it made me realize that what you two have is real. With all due respect, Mrs. Nogueira, your son had plenty of opportunities to stand up for me. He chose not to. The older woman nodded sadly. Eduardo told us everything. How you met. How you tried to hide your wealth at first because you wanted someone to love you for yourself. How you use your money to help others anonymously. Helena was surprised. He told you all that? Yes. And how he's been afraid. Not that you would leave him, but that we would embarrass him with our prejudices. Mrs. Nogueira looked down at her hands. We were wrong about you, and Eduardo was wrong not to defend you more strongly. Yes, he was, Helena agreed quietly. But we're all wrong sometimes, Mrs. Nogueira continued, especially when it comes to protecting the people we love. Eduardo was trying to protect everyone, you from our judgments, us from our own narrow-mindedness. Helena felt her resolve weakening. What is it you want from me, Mrs. Nogueira? Nothing. I just wanted you to know that we were wrong, and that my son truly loves you. She stood up to leave. What you do with that information is up to you. After Mrs. Nogueira left, Helena sat motionless, her mind racing. She'd been hurt, yes, but was she overreacting? Eduardo had made a mistake, a serious one, but didn't everyone deserve a second chance? Her phone buzzed with a text. Message from an unknown number. Ms. Vasconcelos, this is Mr. Nogueira, Eduardo's father. My wife doesn't know I'm contacting you. I want to apologize for suggesting Eduardo should take financial advantage of your relationship. It was wrong and disrespectful. My son rightly put me in my place after you left. He loves you deeply, and I was wrong to doubt that. I hope you can forgive an old man's foolishness. Helena put down her phone, more confused than ever. The entire Nogueira family was reaching out to her. But still, she hesitated. That evening, she cancelled her dinner plans and drove to Eduardo's apartment, needing to think. She parked across the street, not yet ready to face him. Through the window, she could see him sitting at his desk, surrounded by books and papers. Even from a distance, she could tell he looked terrible, unshaven, hair uncombed, shoulders slumped. As she watched, he ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration she knew well. He was grading papers, she realized, still teaching, still living his life even with a broken heart. Helena was about to start her car when Eduardo's door opened. He emerged carrying a trash bag, head down, not noticing her across the street. He wore worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, a far cry from his usual professional attire. As he returned from the dumpster, an elderly neighbor called out to him. Helena couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Eduardo force a smile and stop to chat. Despite his obvious personal turmoil, he took the time to help the old woman carry her groceries inside. It was such a small gesture, but it reminded Helena of why she'd fallen in love with him. His kindness wasn't an act. It was who he was. At his core, she was still debating whether to approach him when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Sophia. "Have you seen the news?" Sophia asked without preamble. "No, why?" "Eduardo gave an interview to Business Today. About you." Helena's heart raced. What did he say?" "It's all over social media. He publicly defended you against rumors that you're cold-hearted in business, called you the most compassionate, ethical business leader he's ever known." "Why would he do that?" Helena asked, genuinely confused. "The article says he couldn't stand by while your character was questioned." "Sound familiar?" Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "Send me the link." She read the article there in her car, across from Eduardo's apartment. He'd given a passionate defense of her business practices, her ethics, her character, publicly putting his reputation on the line for her. When asked about his relationship with Vasconcelos, Nogueira declined to comment, stating only that she deserves privacy and respect, two things often denied to successful women. Helena wiped away tears. Eduardo wasn't trying to win her back through the media. He was simply defending her because it was the right thing to do. Before she could change her mind, she got out of her car and crossed the street. Her hand trembled as she knocked on his door. When Eduardo opened it, the shock on his face was quickly replaced by hope, then caution. "Helena?" "I saw the article," she said simply. He shook his head. "I didn't do it to win you back. I just couldn't let those rumors stand unchallenged." "I know," her voice softened. "May I come in?" His apartment was messier than usual. Books piled haphazardly, coffee cups on every surface, takeout containers. In the kitchen, the signs of a man not taking care of himself. "I'm sorry about the mess," he said, hastily gathering papers from the couch to make room for her. "I wasn't expecting company." Helena sat down, suddenly uncertain. "Your whole family has reached out to me." Eduardo looked surprised. "I didn't ask them to do that." "I know, that's why it matters." She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about that night, about what I heard and what it meant." "I failed you," Eduardo said simply. "I should have defended you more strongly." "Yes, you should have." Helena's voice was firm but not unkind. "But I've also been thinking about how I've handled this. Sneaking into your family's home under false pretenses wasn't exactly the height of trust and honesty. You had reason to be suspicious. I kept making excuses about why you couldn't meet them." Helena nodded. "We both made mistakes. The question is, where do we go from here?" Eduardo sat beside her, close but not touching. "I love you, Helena. That hasn't changed. But I understand if you can't trust me anymore. Trust can be rebuilt," she said carefully. "If both people want it badly enough." Hope flickered in his eyes. "I want it. More than anything. So do I." Helena finally allowed herself to reach for his hand. "But things need to change. No more secrets, no more assumptions about what the other person is thinking or feeling. Complete honesty." "Agreed," Eduardo said quickly, "and I promise to always stand up for you whether you're there or not. And I promise not to disguise myself as household staff to spy on your family," Helena added with a small smile. Eduardo's laugh was surprised and grateful. "That seems fair." Helena leaned closer. "I miss you." "I miss you too," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "These weeks without you have been the worst of my life." Slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, Helena leaned in and kissed him. It was gentle at first, then deeper as 3 weeks of longing poured out. When they finally broke apart, Eduardo rested his forehead against hers. "Does this mean you forgive me?" "I'm working on it," Helena answered honestly. "And you? Do you forgive me for my deception?" "Already done," he assured her. "Though I have to admit, you make a terrible cleaning lady. You miss several spots on the living room table." Helena laughed, the sound surprising her after weeks of sadness. "I never claimed to be good at it." Eduardo grew serious again. Want you to meet my family properly. A real dinner where they can see the woman I fell in love with." Helena hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea? They need to know you, the real you." He squeezed her hand. "And I need to show them, and you, that I'm not ashamed of our relationship or afraid to stand up for you." "All right," Helena agreed, "but not right away. Let's take some time to rebuild what we had first." Eduardo nodded, relief washing over his features. "Whatever you need. I'm just grateful for a second chance." As they sat together on his worn couch, Helena felt something she'd been missing for weeks: hope. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They'd both made mistakes. But they loved each other enough to try again, and maybe that was enough. What she didn't know was that their reconciliation was only the beginning of their challenges. Forces beyond their control were already in motion that would test their newfound commitment in ways neither of them could imagine. Across town, in a sleek downtown office, a man studied a photograph of Helena and Eduardo from a charity event. A month earlier, his expression was cold, calculating. "So she's taken him back," he murmured to himself. "How predictable." He placed the photo in a folder labeled Vasconcelos Acquisitions and smiled thinly. "Enjoy your reunion while it lasts, Helena. Business is business after all." The man picked up his phone and dialed. "It's me." The plan proceeds as discussed. Find out everything you can about Eduardo Nogueira. Weaknesses, debts, ambitions. Everyone has a price. He hung up and looked out at the city's skyline, the same view Helena enjoyed from her office. But while her empire had been built on hard work and ethical practices, Victor Mendez had built his on manipulation and ruthless tactics. And now he had Helena Vasconcelos in his sights. 1 month after their reconciliation, Helena and Eduardo sat at her dining room table, sharing a quiet dinner. Things between them had improved steadily. They'd taken things slowly, rebuilding trust day by day. "The faculty meeting ran late today," Eduardo said, reaching for his wine glass. "The department is considering my proposal for the new literature program," Helena smiled. "That's wonderful. When will you hear their decision?" "Next week. If they approve it, I'll be directing the program." He hesitated. "It would mean more responsibility, longer hours." "But it's what you've always wanted," Helena reminded him, "to create a program that makes literature accessible to underprivileged students." Eduardo nodded. "True. I just don't want work to come between us again." "It won't," Helena assured him, touching his hand. "We're stronger now. We talk about things instead of making assumptions." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Maria appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Vasconcelos, there's a courier with an urgent package. He insists it requires your immediate signature." Helena frowned. "At this hour?" She excused herself and went to the door. The courier handed her a large envelope marked "Confidential." She signed for it and brought it back to the dining room. "What is it?" Eduardo asked. "I'm not sure." Helena opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents. As she scanned the first page, her expression darkened. "Helena, what's wrong?" She handed him the papers wordlessly. The heading read, "Proposed acquisition of Vasconcelos Hotels International by Mendez Global Enterprises." Eduardo looked up, confused. "I don't understand. Are you selling your company?" "Absolutely not," Helena said firmly. "Victor Mendez has been trying to buy me out for years. I've always refused." "Then what's this?" "A hostile takeover attempt." Helena flipped through the pages, her face growing more concerned. "He's offering to buy shares at 20% above market value." "Is that legal?" Helena nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, yes. He's appealing directly to shareholders, bypassing me entirely." She reached for her phone. "I need to call my lawyer." While Helena spoke with her attorney, Eduardo studied the documents. He might not be a businessman, but he understood enough to see this was serious. Victor Mendez had timed his move perfectly, just before Helena's company was set to announce quarterly earnings. When she finished her call, Helena looked exhausted. "I need to go to the office. My CFO and legal team are meeting me there. I'll come with you," Eduardo offered immediately. Helena hesitated. You don't have to. This might take all night. I want to be there for you, he insisted, even if I just wait in the lobby. His support meant everything to Helena. In her previous relationships, the men in her life had either been intimidated by her business crises or had tried to take control. Eduardo was simply there, offering support without trying to override her authority. The Vasconcelos Hotel's international headquarters was bustling with activity despite the late hour when they arrived. Helena's assistant, Carol, met them at the elevator. Everyone's in the main conference room, she reported, handing Helena a tablet with the latest stock information. And Mr. Mendez called twice. He wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. I'll bet he does, Helena muttered. She turned to Eduardo. This might take hours. You really don't have to stay. Eduardo kissed her cheek. I'll be in the waiting area if you need me. The meeting was every bit as intense as Helena had expected. Her CFO, Richard, laid out the numbers starkly. Mendez has already secured commitments from shareholders representing 15% of the company, he explained. Combined with the 5% he already owned, he's at 20%. If he gets to 30%, we're in serious trouble. Helena's general counsel, Denise, added, We can implement some defensive measures, but we need to move quickly. Mendez knows what he's doing. Why now? Helena asked. He's made offers before, but never like this. Richard and Denise exchanged glances. There might be a reason, Richard said carefully. Rumors about your relationship with Professor Noguera. Helena stiffened. What about it? Some of the older board members are traditional, Denise explained delicately. There have been concerns that your personal life might be affecting your focus. That's ridiculous, Helena snapped. My relationship has nothing to do with how I run this company. We know that, Richard assured her. But perception matters to shareholders, and Mendez is likely playing on those perceptions. Helena took a deep breath, forcing herself to think strategically. We need to call an emergency board meeting tomorrow and prepare a statement for the press. She turned to Carol. Set up the meeting with Mendez. Let's hear what he has to say. Hours later, when the initial crisis response was organized, Helena found Eduardo asleep in a chair in the waiting area, a book open on his lap. The sight touched her deeply. He had stayed, just as he promised. She gently woke him. Let's go. Home. There's nothing more we can do tonight. In the car, Eduardo asked, How bad is it? Bad, Helena admitted. Victor Mendez is a ruthless corporate raider. He buys companies, breaks them apart, and sells the pieces for profit. If he takes over Vasconcelos hotels, thousands of people could lose their jobs. You won't let that happen, Eduardo said with absolute confidence. I'll fight him with everything I have, Helena promised. Then, hesitantly, there's something else. Apparently, some board members have concerns about us. Eduardo looked surprised. About our relationship, why? They're old-fashioned. They think I'm distracted, less focused on the business. She sighed. Mendez is using that perception against me. Should we take a step back? Eduardo asked reluctantly. For the sake of your company. Helena's answer was immediate. Absolutely not. I won't let Victor Mendez dictate my personal life. She took his hand. But you should know what we're facing. This could get ugly. The next morning, Helena entered her office to find Victor Mendez already waiting for her. At 55, he was still handsome in a cold, calculated way. His tailored suit and perfectly groomed silver hair projected power and confidence. Helena, he said smoothly, standing to greet her. You look lovely as always. Save it, Victor, she replied coolly. What do you want? He smiled, unperturbed. Direct as ever. That's what I've always liked about you. You have 15 minutes. Use them wisely. Victor sat back down, adjusting his cuffs. I want what I've always wanted. Vasconcelos Hotels International. But this time I'm going to get it. Your previous attempts failed. This one will too. I don't think so. Victor's smile turned predatory. Your shareholders are nervous, Helena. The hotel industry is changing. Your traditional approach is seen as outdated. Helena crossed her arms. My traditional approach has resulted in 18 consecutive quarters of growth. Modest growth, Victor corrected. Under my leadership, the returns would be much higher, until you strip the company bare and fire half the staff. Victor shrugged. Business is business, but I'm willing to make you an offer. He slid a folder across the desk. Your personal stake in the company, 26%. Sell it to me directly, and I'll make you very, very rich. Helena didn't even glance at the folder. I built this company from the ground up, Victor. It's not for sale. Everyone has a price, Helena. Not me. She stood up. Is that all? Victor rose slowly. Almost. There is one more thing. His tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. How is Eduardo? Enjoying his little literature program proposal? Helena froze. How do you know about that? I make it my business to know things, Victor replied, especially about the people close to my investments. Stay away from Eduardo, Helena warned, her voice dangerous. Victor raised his hands in mock surrender. I'm simply making conversation. You've chosen an interesting partner, quite different from your usual type. My relationship is none of your business. Perhaps not. Victor headed for the door, then paused. But your shareholders might disagree. A CEO should be focused on business, not romance, especially with someone so clearly from a different world. After he left, Helena sat heavily in her chair, her mind racing. Victor's implied threat against Eduardo was clear. This wasn't just about business anymore, it was personal. Throughout the day, Helena moved through a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategy sessions. The emergency board meeting was set for the following morning. Everything hinged on her ability to convince the board to reject Mendez's offer. Late that afternoon, she received a text from Eduardo. Just finished my presentation. The committee seemed impressed. Missing you. Dinner tonight. Despite her exhaustion, Helena smiled. Yes, my place at 8. I have news. 8. That evening, Eduardo arrived with takeout from their favorite restaurant. He could tell immediately that Helena was stressed. That bad? He asked, setting out the food. Worse, she admitted. Victor Mendez mentioned you today. By name. Eduardo looked surprised. Me? Why would he care about me? To get to me. Helena explained Victor's implied threat. He's trying to use our relationship against me with the board. Eduardo's expression hardened. Can he actually do that? He can try. Helena pushed her food around her plate. The board meeting tomorrow will be crucial. If I can't convince them to support me, Mendez could win. What can I do to help? Eduardo asked simply. Helena looked at him gratefully. Just being here helps, but there is one thing. She hesitated. Would you be willing to meet some of the board members? Let them see the real you, not whatever image Mendez is painting. Eduardo nodded without hesitation. Of course, whatever you need. There's a company event on Friday. Key shareholders and board members will be there. Helena took his hand. It might be uncomfortable. These people can be judgmental. I've faced worse, Eduardo assured her. And this time I won't be silent. I'll show them exactly who I am, the man who loves you and supports your vision. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. This was the man she'd fallen in love with. Brave, supportive, willing to fight alongside her. The next day's board meeting was tense. Helena presented a detailed defense strategy against Mendez's takeover attempt, outlining both the legal maneuvers and public relations campaign she planned to implement. Most board members seemed supportive, but a few raised concerns. Ms. Vasconcelos, said Warren Phillips, one of the oldest members, there have been rumors about your personal life affecting your judgment. Can you address those? Helena met his gaze directly. My personal life has never interfered with my leadership of this company. My track record speaks for itself. Yet this takeover attempt comes just as you've entered a new relationship, another member noted. Correlation is not causation, Helena replied evenly. Victor Mendez has made multiple attempts to acquire this company over the years. This is simply his latest tactic. In the end, the board voted to support Helena's defense strategy, but the margin was closer than she would have liked. She had work to do to shore up their confidence. That evening, exhausted but determined, Helena called Sophia for advice. I need to win over the board completely, she explained. They're supporting me for now, but I can feel their hesitation. It's the Eduardo factor, Sophia said bluntly. They see him as a distraction. He's anything but, Helena protested. Eduardo actually helps me think more clearly. He reminds me why the company matters, the people whose livelihoods depend on it. Then that's what you need to show them, Sophia advised. Let them see how Eduardo strengthens you, not distracts you. The Friday night event was held at the grand ballroom of the flagship Vasconcelos Hotel. Helena had been attending such functions for years, but tonight felt different. Eduardo would be by her side, facing the scrutiny of the business world that had been her domain alone until now. When he arrived at her penthouse to pick her up, Helena's breath caught. Eduardo had traded his usual professor's attire for a perfectly tailored suit. He looked handsome, confident, and completely at ease. "You look amazing," she said, genuinely impressed. Eduardo smiled. "I wanted to look the part. These people need to see that I belong at your side." "For you always belong at my side," Helena assured him. "Just be yourself tonight, that's all I need." The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived. Helena felt the subtle shift in attention as they entered, the curious glances and whispered comments. "Helena Vasconcelos," a voice called. Warren Phillips approached, martini in hand. "And this must be the professor we've heard so much about." "Warren, this is Eduardo Nogueira," Helena introduced them. "Eduardo, Warren is one of our longest-serving board members." Eduardo extended his hand with easy confidence. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Phillips. Helena speaks highly of your business acumen." Warren seemed surprised by Eduardo's poise. "I understand you teach literature, Professor Nogueira. Quite different from our world of hotels and finance." "Different fields, perhaps, but with common elements," Eduardo replied smoothly. "Both require understanding people, their desires, motivations, and needs." Warren raised an eyebrow, intrigued, despite himself. An interesting perspective. As the evening progressed, Eduardo moved through the crowd with natural charm. He engaged board members in thoughtful conversation, showing genuine interest in the business without pretending to be an expert. Several times, Helena caught snippets of his conversations. "No, I don't advise Helena on business matters," she overheard him tell a shareholder. "She's the expert there. My role is to support her, to be a sounding board when she needs one. We respect each other's separate domains while sharing our lives." The time dinner was served. Helena could see a shift in the room. The initial skepticism was giving way to cautious acceptance. Eduardo wasn't what they had expected, not an opportunist or a distraction, but a thoughtful, educated man who clearly adored Helena while respecting her professional authority. As they took their seats, Helena squeezed Eduardo's hand under the table. "You're amazing," she whispered. "They're actually warming up to you." Eduardo smiled. "I'm just being myself, the self that loves and respects you." The moment was broken by a commotion at the entrance. Helena looked up to see Victor Mendez striding into the ballroom, radiating confidence. "He wasn't invited," she hissed to Carol, who sat nearby. "I know," Carol replied. "Security tried to stop him, but he claimed he's now a major shareholder and has every right to be here." Helena straightened her shoulders. "It's fine, we knew this wouldn't be easy." Victor made his way through the room, stopping to chat with board members and shareholders, clearly campaigning. When he reached Helena's table, his smile was predatory. "Helena, lovely event." His gaze shifted to Eduardo. "Professor Nogueira, I presume? I've heard so much about you." Eduardo stood and offered his hand. "Mr. Mendez, your reputation precedes you as well." Victor's smile tightened at Eduardo's calm demeanor. He'd clearly expected to intimidate the professor. "I hope I'm not interrupting a romantic evening," Victor said with false concern. "But business calls. Have you shared the latest developments with your companion, Helena?" "What developments?" Helena asked sharply. Victor looked surprised. "You haven't seen the Business Wire? Institutional Investor Weekly is running a piece. It's on Monday, questioning your leadership. Apparently, several key clients have expressed concerns about the future direction of Vasconcelos hotels." Helena maintained her composure despite the shock. "Interesting timing. Almost as if someone planted those concerns," Victor shrugged. "The market responds to uncertainty, Helena, and right now there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding you." He glanced meaningfully at Eduardo. personal and professional. If you'll excuse us, Eduardo said firmly. Helena and I were about to enjoy dinner with her colleagues. Perhaps business. Discussions could wait for a more appropriate time. Victor's eyes narrowed at the dismissal. Of course, enjoy your evening. He leaned closer to Helena. This is just the beginning. By this time next month, I'll be running your company. After he walked away, Eduardo turned to Helena. Are you all right? She nodded, though inwardly she was shaken. He's escalating. The article he mentioned, it could damage investor confidence, drive down our stock price. Can you counter it? I can try. Helena took a deep breath. But he's playing hardball now. The rest of the evening was a careful balancing act. Helena needed to reassure board members and shareholders without appearing defensive. Eduardo stayed by her side, a steady, calming presence. By the end of the night, Helena was exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Several board members had expressed support for her leadership, regardless of Victor's tactics. As they rode home in her car, Eduardo asked, "What's the next step?" I need to get ahead of that article, Helena said. First thing tomorrow, I'll call a press conference, show strength, confidence. We can't let Victor control the narrative. Eduardo nodded thoughtfully. What about a different approach? Something more personal? What do you mean? Victor is attacking you on two fronts, questioning your business judgment and suggesting our relationship is a distraction. Eduardo squeezed her hand. What if we address both directly? Not separately, but together? Helena considered this. You mean, show how our relationship actually strengthens my leadership? Exactly. Most CEOs try to keep their personal and professional lives completely separate. But what if that's not actually the best approach? What if being fulfilled personally makes you even stronger professionally? The idea was unorthodox but intriguing. My PR team would have a fit, Helena said with a small smile. Maybe, or maybe they'd see the potential. Eduardo grew serious. Victor is trying to use our relationship as a weapon against you. Let's turn it into your greatest strength instead. Helena felt a spark of inspiration. You know, that might actually work. Not a defensive strategy, but an offensive one. She kissed him quickly. You're brilliant. I have my moments, Eduardo said modestly. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Whatever happens with Victor Mendez and the company, we face it together. No shutting me out to protect me. Helena nodded solemnly. I promise, we're a team now. What they didn't know as they made plans was that Victor Mendez had already set in motion events that would test their relationship in ways they couldn't imagine. The takeover attempt was just the beginning. His true plan was far more insidious. In a luxurious hotel suite across town, Victor reviewed the files his investigator had compiled on Eduardo Nogueira. Everyone has secrets, he mused, flipping through the pages. Even idealistic literature professors. He stopped at a photo of a young woman. And some secrets are more damaging than others. Victor picked up his phone. It's time for phase 2. Bring in the woman. Make sure she understands exactly what to do. He paused, smiling coldly. Helena Vasconcelos is about to learn a painful lesson about trust. He hung up and poured himself a celebratory whiskey. Business was business, but this had become personal. Helena had rejected him, both his business offers and, years ago, his romantic advances. Now he would take everything from her, her company, her reputation, and the man she loved. By Monday morning, the battle for Vasconcelos Hotels International would enter a new, more dangerous phase. And Helena would face her greatest challenge, yet one that would test not only her business acumen, but the very foundation of trust she'd rebuilt with Eduardo. Monday morning arrived with dark clouds threatening rain, fitting for the storm Helena was about to face. She'd spent the weekend with her crisis management team preparing for the article Victor had mentioned. When it appeared online at 6 a.m., it was even worse than she'd feared. Vasconcelos Hotels, a company in crisis? Screamed the headline. The piece questioned everything from Helena's leadership to the company's financial stability, quoting anonymous sources close to the board, expressing concerns about her personal distractions affecting business decisions. It's a hatchet job, Denise said as the team gathered in Helena's office. Clearly planted by Mendez, Helena scrolled through the article on her tablet. But effective. Our stock will take a hit when the market opens. Richard nodded grimly. We're already seeing pre-market trading down 8%. We need to respond immediately, Helena decided. Not defensively, but with strength and transparency. She outlined the strategy she and Eduardo had discussed. I want to schedule a press conference for noon and prepare a personal statement from me, something that addresses both the business concerns and the personal allegations head-on. Her team exchanged uncertain glances. Are you sure about discussing your personal life? The PR director asked cautiously. We usually advise keeping business and personal separate. That's exactly what Mendez wants, Helena explained. He's using my relationship with Eduardo as a weapon. I'm going to turn it around on him. As her team dispersed to execute the plan, Helena's phone rang. It was Eduardo. I saw the article, he said without preamble. Are you okay? I'm fine, Helena assured him. We expected this. We're holding a press conference at noon. I'll be there, Eduardo promised. Helena hesitated. Are you sure? It might get ugly. Absolutely sure. We said we'd face this together, remember? His unwavering support strengthened her resolve. Thank you. I love you. I love you too. Stay strong. Helena spent the next few hours in intense preparation, reviewing financial data and drafting her statement. She needed to project absolute confidence while being honest about the challenges. Any hint of weakness would play into Mendez's hands. At 11:30, just as she was preparing to leave for the press conference, Carol knocked on her door. There's someone here to see you, she said nervously. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. About Eduardo. Helena frowned. Who is it? She says her name is Gabriela Sousa. She seems upset. Helena checked her watch. She didn't have time for this, but something in Carol's expression made her pause. Send her in, but only for 5 minutes. The woman who entered was striking, mid-30s with long dark hair and elegant features. Her expensive clothes and perfectly manicured nails spoke of wealth and privilege. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to attention. Ms. Vasconcelos, she began, her voice smooth but with an undercurrent of tension. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I have exactly 5 minutes, Helena said firmly. You mentioned Eduardo? Gabriela nodded, her eyes taking in the office with studied casualness. Yes, Eduardo Nogueira. I believe he's your boyfriend? Helena kept her expression neutral. What about him? This is awkward. Gabriela adjusted her designer purse on her lap. I've known Eduardo for many years. We were close. If you're an old friend of Eduardo's, why come to me instead of contacting him directly? Gabriela looked down, a perfect picture of discomfort. Because what I have to say affects you as well. She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. Eduardo and I weren't just friends, Ms. Vasconcelos. We were engaged. Helena kept her face impassive, though her heart rate increased. When was this? 5 years ago. We were together for 3 years before that. Gabriela's eyes met Helena's. The engagement ended badly. He wasn't the man I thought he was. Warning bells rang in Helena's mind. The timing of this visit, coming right before her press conference, was too convenient. Why are you telling me this now? I saw your picture together in the society pages. I wanted to warn you. Gabriela leaned forward. Eduardo has a pattern. He seeks out successful, wealthy women, makes them fall in love with him. Then, when he has access to their resources, let me guess, Helena interrupted coldly. He took advantage of you financially. Gabriela seemed surprised by Helena's directness. Yes, exactly. Small amounts at first. Help with student loans, a car when his broke down. Then larger investments in projects that never materialized. Helena checked her watch. Miss Sousa, I appreciate your concern, but I need to leave for an important meeting. Of course, Gabriela stood smoothly. I've said what I came to say. She placed a business card on the desk. My contact information if you have questions later. And here, she hesitated, then pulled an envelope from her purse. Photos, bank statements, proof of what I'm saying. I'm not trying to hurt you, Ms. Vasconcelos. I just wish someone had warned me. After she left, Helena stared at the envelope but didn't open it. The timing was too perfect, the story too convenient. This had Victor Mendez written all over it. She slipped the envelope into her desk drawer and headed for the press conference. She'd deal with Gabriela Souza later. Right now, she had a company to save. The hotel's main conference room was packed with reporters. Helena spotted Eduardo in the back, his presence giving her strength. Her team had arranged for the press conference to be live-streamed to all company locations worldwide, allowing employees to watch in real time. Helena approached the podium. With confidence, her navy blue suit projecting authority, her expression determined. "Good afternoon," she began. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. I'm here to address the allegations made in this morning's article in Institutional Investor Weekly, and to provide clarity on the future of Vasconcelos Hotels International." For the next 15 minutes, Helena methodically dismantled the article's claims with hard data and facts. She presented the company's solid financial position, outlined their growth strategy, and highlighted recent successes. Then, she pivoted to the personal allegations. The article suggested that my personal life has become a distraction that is affecting my leadership. Let me be clear. My relationship with Professor Eduardo Nogueira has not detracted from my focus, it has enhanced it. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the typical corporate response. For years, I devoted myself exclusively to building this company, often at the expense of personal connections, Helena continued. What I've learned is that balance makes me a better leader. Having someone who supports me, challenges me, and reminds me why our work matters has strengthened my resolve and clarified my vision for this company. Helena's gaze found Eduardo in the crowd. He nodded, encouragingly. Victor Mendez wants you to believe that my personal happiness is somehow a liability for Vasconcelos Hotels. I'm here to tell you it's our greatest asset. Happy, fulfilled leaders make better decisions. They inspire loyalty. They think about long-term sustainability, not just quarterly profits. She leaned forward slightly, her voice firm. Make no mistake. This takeover attempt is not about creating value. It's about destroying it. Victor Mendez has a documented history of acquiring companies, stripping their assets and eliminating jobs. That's not the future I envision. For the thousands of dedicated employees who make Vasconcelos Hotels International, the industry leader it is today. Helena concluded by announcing a new employee ownership program and a major expansion into sustainable luxury tourism, bold moves that demonstrated her confidence in the company's future. As the Q&A session began, she handled every question with poise and authority. When one reporter asked about her relationship directly, she didn't flinch. Professor Nogueira and I met at a charity event last year. Our relationship developed naturally, based on mutual respect and shared values. And yes, he's here today, Helena smiled, because unlike what Mr. Mendez might believe, supporting someone you love during challenging times isn't a distraction, it's a strength. By the time the press conference ended, the initial reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Helena's straightforward approach had caught the media off guard, and early reports praised her transparency and confidence. The stock price, which had dropped at the opening bell, began to recover. It was a small victory, but an important one. Eduardo waited for her in a private room adjacent to the conference area. When she entered, he embraced her tightly. "You were magnificent," he said proudly. "Absolutely magnificent." Helena melted into his arms for a moment, allowing herself a brief respite from the day's tension. Then she remembered Gabriela Souza. "Eduardo," she said, pulling back slightly. "Do you know someone named Gabriela Souza?" His expression changed immediately. Confusion, then recognition, then concern. "Yes, I know her." "How do you know that?" "Name?" "She came to see me right before the press conference." Helena watched his reaction carefully. "She said you were engaged." Eduardo ran a hand through his hair, clearly disturbed. "We were, briefly, 5 years ago. It ended, badly. She implied you were with her for her money." Eduardo's expression hardened. "Of course she did. That was always her narrative." He met Helena's gaze directly. "Is that what you believe?" Helena shook her head. No, the timing of her visit was too convenient. This has Victor Mendez written all over it. Mendez? You think he sent her? I'm almost certain of it. But I need to know the truth, Eduardo, about you and Gabriela. Eduardo sighed heavily. Let's sit down, this isn't a quick story. They moved to the small seating area. Eduardo took a moment to gather his thoughts before beginning. Gabriela and I met when I was finishing my PhD. She was a patron of the arts from a wealthy family. She seemed interested in my research, my passion for literature. He shook his head ruefully. I was flattered by her attention. We started dating and things moved quickly. She was wealthy, Helena prompted. Very. Family money, mostly. She liked to remind me of that fact regularly. Eduardo's expression grew pained. At first, everything seemed perfect. She was intelligent, beautiful, connected. She introduced me to people who could help my career. But over time, I realized she didn't want a partner. She wanted possession. What do you mean? Gabriela used her money as control. She'd offer to pay for things, then use that generosity to dictate my choices. What I wore, who I spent time with, even what research I pursued. Eduardo's voice hardened. When I received a small inheritance from my grandmother, I used it to pay off my student loans myself. Gabriela was furious. She'd wanted me indebted to her. Helena nodded slowly. So, what happened? I started pulling away. Establishing boundaries. She escalated, bought me expensive gifts I couldn't reciprocate, offered to invest in research projects with strings attached. Eduardo sighed. When I finally ended our engagement, she couldn't accept that I was leaving her, not her money. She spread rumors in our social circle that I'd used her financially. Were any of them true? Eduardo met her gaze steadily. I never asked Gabriela for money, ever. Yes, she paid for expensive dinners and vacations, things she insisted on that I couldn't afford. But I never took cash from her, never asked her to pay my debts or fund my work. Helena believed him. His story aligned with what she knew of Eduardo's character, his independence, his integrity. Why didn't you tell me about her before? It was a painful chapter I wanted to forget, and honestly, it never seemed relevant. He took her hand. Helena, you and Gabriela are nothing alike. You use your success to lift people up, not control them. You've never once made me feel lesser because of your wealth. Helena squeezed his hand. Thank you for telling me now. Mendez clearly thought this would drive a wedge between us. He doesn't know who he's dealing with, Eduardo said with a small smile. Back at her office, Helena found her team celebrating the positive response to the press conference. The stock had recovered most of its losses, and statements of support were coming in from major shareholders. It's not over, Helena cautioned. Mendez won't give up easily, but we've won the first round. As if on cue, her phone rang with an unknown number. That was quite a performance, Victor Mendez said when she answered. Bold strategy, leveraging your relationship so publicly. It wasn't strategy, Victor. It was truth, something you might not recognize. He chuckled. Always. So righteous. Did you enjoy meeting Gabriela? She had quite a story to tell. Save your games, Victor. I know what you're doing. Do you? His voice hardened. This is just the beginning, Helena. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd taken my offer. Is that a threat? A promise. Everyone has secrets, Helena. Everyone has vulnerabilities. I wonder what I'll find when I dig deeper into Professor Noguera's past, or yours. Helena refused to be intimidated. Do your worst, Victor. Eduardo and I have nothing to hide. We'll see. The line went dead. Despite her brave words, Helena felt uneasy. Victor was ruthless, with seemingly unlimited resources to pursue his vendetta. How far would he go? That evening, Helena invited Eduardo's family to her penthouse for dinner. After the press conference, she wanted to strengthen their united front. The Nogueras had come a long way in accepting her, and tonight they seemed genuinely supportive. We saw you on TV, Mrs. Noguera said warmly. You were wonderful, so strong and confident. And the way you talked about Eduardo, Luisa added. It was beautiful. Mr. Noguera cleared his throat. I must admit I was wrong about you, Helena. You truly care for our son, not just as an accessory. Dad, Eduardo warned, but Helena touched his arm. "It's all right. We've all had misconceptions to overcome." She smiled at Eduardo's father. "Thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself." As they enjoyed dinner, Helena felt a profound sense of belonging. This was what had been missing in her life, not just Eduardo, but family. People who cared about her as Helena, not as the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Later, after Eduardo's family had left, he helped her clear the table. "That went well," he observed. "My father actually complimented your business acumen. I think that's his highest form of approval." Helena laughed. "Progress." Eduardo grew serious. "Have you thought about what happens next? With Mendez?" "Every minute." Helena set down the plates she was carrying. "He'll escalate. Today was just the opening move." "We need to be ready," Eduardo agreed. "For anything, including more people from your past showing up with stories to tell?" Eduardo winced. "I should have told you about Gabriela. I'm sorry. We all have parts of our past we'd rather forget," Helena said gently. "But from now on, no more secrets. Mendez will use anything he can against us." Eduardo nodded solemnly. No more secrets. The next few days were tense but productive. Helena's team implemented their defense strategy, reaching out to key shareholders and customers to reinforce confidence. The press coverage of Helena's straightforward approach was largely positive, and Victor Mendez had gone suspiciously quiet. "It's the calm before the storm," Helena told Eduardo over dinner at his apartment. She'd insisted on coming to his place, a deliberate step away from the luxury she was accustomed to. "Mendez is planning something. I can feel it. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together," Eduardo assured her. He hesitated, then added, "There's something I need to tell you. About my past." Helena set down her fork. "What is it?" "Nothing sinister," he said quickly. "But since we agreed on no secrets, about my family wasn't always simple but of good heart, as I described them." Helena waited, giving him space to continue. "My grandfather was actually quite wealthy. He owned a successful import business, but he lost everything in a bad investment when I was a teenager." Eduardo sighed. "My father never recovered from that fall from grace. It's why he's so suspicious of wealth, so concerned about appearances." "That explains a lot," Helena said thoughtfully. "About your family's reaction to me." Eduardo nodded. "I should have told you sooner. It might have helped you understand them better. Thank you for telling me now." Helena reached for his hand. "Any other skeletons in your closet I should know about?" "No skeletons," Eduardo promised. "Just ordinary regrets and mistakes." The next morning, Helena woke to multiple missed calls from Carol, Denise, and Richard. Something was wrong. She called Carol immediately. "What's happening?" "You need to come in right away," Carol said, her voice tight with tension. "The Journal has run a story." "About the takeover attempt?" "No, about you and Eduardo." Helena's blood ran cold. "I'm on my way." When she arrived at her office, her executive team was waiting, their expressions grim. Richard handed her the newspaper without a word. The headline made her heart sink. "Vasconcelos, CEO's boyfriend, a history of fortune hunting." The article detailed Eduardo's relationship with Gabriela Sousa, painting him as a calculating social climber who targeted wealthy women. It included quotes from friends who claimed he had a pattern of such behavior, with Helena as his latest victim. Most damaging were the photographs, Eduardo and Gabriela at social events, looking every inch the perfect couple, and bank statements, showing large transfers from Gabriela's accounts, with Eduardo's name referenced in the notes. "This is character assassination," Helena said, her voice shaking with anger. "It's effective character assassination," Denise corrected grimly. "The stock is down 15% already. Major shareholders are calling for an emergency board meeting." "Victor Mendez is behind this," Helena insisted. "These sources are paid off, and these bank statements, they could be doctored." "Maybe," Richard agreed. "But the damage is done, the narrative is out there. Eduardo Nogueira is using you for your money, just like he used Gabriela Sousa." Helena's phone rang. "Eduardo." She stepped away to answer it. "Have you seen it?" He asked without preamble, his voice tight with controlled fury. Yes, it's Mendez. He's using Gabriella's story to attack us. Those bank statements are fake, Eduardo said flatly. I never took money from her, never. I believe you. Helena ran a hand through her hair. But the board is calling an emergency meeting. I need to go. I'm coming to your office, Eduardo decided. We need to respond to this together. Helena hesitated. That might not be the best idea right now. The optics… Damn the optics, Eduardo interrupted. I won't hide while they smear my name and threaten what we've built. We said we'd face this together, remember? His determination moved her. You're right. Come, we'll figure this out. By the time Eduardo arrived, Helena's office had become crisis central. Her team was fielding calls from shareholders, reporters and board members, all demanding responses to the article's allegations. Eduardo entered the chaos with quiet dignity. Despite the stares and whispers, he moved directly to Helena's side. What's the plan? He asked simply. Helena drew strength from his presence. The board meeting is in an hour. I need to convince them this is a calculated attack by Mendez, not a legitimate concern. I want to address the board, Eduardo said firmly. They need to hear directly from me. Helena's advisors exchanged alarmed glances. That's unprecedented, Denise objected. Board meetings are closed to non-members. Make an exception, Eduardo insisted. If they're questioning my character, I deserve the right to defend it. Helena studied his face, the determination, the integrity she'd always seen there. He's right, set it up. The boardroom was tense when Helena entered with Eduardo. Several members frowned at his presence, while others looked merely curious. Victor Mendez sat at the far end of the table, having used his newly acquired shares to secure a seat. Ms. Vasconcelos, Warren Phillips began formally. We've called this emergency meeting to address the serious allegations raised in today's article. Before we begin, Helena said firmly, I'd like to introduce Professor Eduardo Nogueira. Given that his character is central to today's discussion, I've invited him to speak directly to the board. Mendez smiled coldly. How convenient. The boyfriend comes to the rescue. I believe in facing accusations directly, Mr. Mendez, Eduardo replied calmly. Something you might not understand. Warren cleared his throat. This is highly irregular, but under the circumstances, proceed, Professor. Eduardo stood, addressing the room with the same confident poise he showed in his university lectures. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your concerns. This article paints me as a fortune hunter who preys on successful women. It's a compelling narrative, except it isn't true. He acknowledged the bank statements published in the article. These documents are either forgeries or deliberately misrepresented. Yes, I was engaged to Gabriela Sousa. Our relationship ended when I realized she viewed her wealth as a means of control, not support. Eduardo's gaze swept the room. I've never asked Helena for money. I've never accepted money from her. My career as a professor and author is modest but fulfilling. If I wanted wealth, there are far easier paths than academia. He turned to face Mendez directly. What this article doesn't mention is that Gabriela Sousa's family has significant business ties to Mendez Global Enterprises, or that she received a newly created executive position at one of Mr. Mendez's subsidiaries just last month. A murmur ran through the board. This was new information, even to Helena. How did you discover that? Mendez demanded, his composure slipping slightly. I'm a researcher by profession, Mr. Mendez. Finding connections is what I do. Eduardo smiled thinly. Did you think I wouldn't investigate once Gabriela suddenly reappeared in my life? Helena watched with pride as Eduardo methodically dismantled the article's claims, presenting evidence of Gabriela's history of manipulative behavior and her connections to Mendez. My relationship with Helena isn't about money or status, Eduardo concluded. It's about love, respect, and shared values. Values that frankly stand in direct opposition to the business practices Mr. Mendez represents. He turned to the board. Members, you have a choice to make today. Will you allow a hostile takeover based on fabricated personal attacks, or will you stand behind the leader who has consistently delivered value, growth, and ethical management? As Eduardo sat down, the room was silent. Helena squeezed his hand under the table, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. Warren Phillips, was the first to speak. "These are serious counter-allegations, Mr. Mendez. Do you wish to respond?" Mendez's smile was strained. "Professor Noguera is naturally defensive, but the evidence speaks for itself. His pattern of pursuing wealthy women—" "There is no pattern," Helena interrupted. "One previous relationship does not constitute a pattern. And as Eduardo has shown, the financial evidence in the article is highly questionable. The board needs to consider whether these personal issues are affecting your judgment," Mendez pressed. "My judgment?" Helena laughed incredulously. "Victor, let's be honest about what's happening here. You've wanted my company for years. When I repeatedly refused to sell, you resorted to a hostile takeover. When that faced resistance, you launched personal attacks to undermine confidence in my leadership." She stood, commanding the room's attention. "Board members, the question isn't about my personal life. It's about what kind of company Vasconcelos Hotels International will be going forward." Helena outlined the stark contrast between her vision, sustainable growth, employee ownership, ethical practices, and Mendez's history of asset stripping and mass layoffs. "The choice is clear," she concluded. "Stand with me, and we continue building something meaningful. Side with Mendez, and watch everything we've built be dismantled for short-term profit." The debate that followed was intense but respectful. Helena answered every question with transparency and conviction. Eduardo remained quietly supportive, speaking only when directly addressed. Finally, Warren called for a vote on whether to support Helena's leadership and reject Mendez's takeover attempt. The result was clear: 12 votes supporting Helena, 3 supporting Mendez. "The board has spoken," Warren announced formally. "Vasconcelos Hotels International will remain under the leadership of Helena Vasconcelos. Mr. Mendez, your takeover attempt is officially rejected." Mendez's face hardened with barely controlled rage. "This isn't over. I still own 20% of the company, which you're welcome to keep or sell," Helena replied evenly. "But you will not control this company, not now, not ever." As the board meeting adjourned, Helena felt a profound sense of relief, mixed with lingering caution. They had won this battle, but Mendez wasn't the type to concede easily. Outside the boardroom, Eduardo pulled her into a private corner. "You were amazing in there." Helena smiled up at him. "We were amazing. Your speech changed minds, Eduardo. I could see it happening. It was the truth, that's all." He touched her cheek gently. "What happens now?" "Now," Helena said determinedly, "we go on the offensive." Over the next week, Helena's team implemented a comprehensive strategy to counter Mendez's attacks. They released evidence of Gabriela's connections to Mendez, filed complaints with the Securities and Exchange Commission about market manipulation, and launched a public relations campaign highlighting the company's strong performance and ethical practices. Most dramatically, Helena announced a share buyback program specifically targeting small shareholders who might be tempted by Mendez's inflated offers. The message was clear: Helena was fighting for her company with every tool at her disposal. Simultaneously, Eduardo took a leave of absence from the university to focus on the literature program he'd developed, a program now expanded through a substantial grant from the Vasconcelos Foundation to bring literature education to underserved communities. "It's not a conflict of interest," Helena explained when questioned about the foundation's support. "The Vasconcelos Foundation operates independently with its own board. Eduardo's program was selected on merit through the standard application process. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Helena received an unexpected call from Warren Phillips. "Victor Mendez is selling his shares," the board chairman reported. "All of them." Helena was stunned. "Why? That doesn't sound like Victor." "Apparently, he's facing investigations into business practices at several of his companies. The SEC, the Department of Justice. Serious stuff. He needs liquid assets for legal fees." After hanging up, Helena immediately called Eduardo. "It's over. Mendez is selling out. He's facing federal investigations." Eduardo was silent for a moment. "That's convenient timing." "Very convenient," Helena agreed, almost as if someone provided evidence to the authorities about his questionable business practices. Someone who, perhaps, had been researching connections between Gabriela Sousa and Mendez's companies. Helena laughed. Professor Nogueira, did you sic the feds on Victor Mendes? I merely forwarded some concerning documentation I discovered during my research to the appropriate authorities, Eduardo replied innocently, as any responsible citizen would do. That evening, they celebrated their victory quietly at Eduardo's apartment. As they sat on his small balcony, watching the sunset, Helena felt a peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. I've been thinking, she said, leaning against Eduardo's shoulder. This whole ordeal with Mendes made me realize something important. What's that? Life is too short to waste on other people's expectations. She turned to face him. For years I've lived for the company, built walls around my personal life, worried about appearances and perceptions. Eduardo nodded, encouraging her to continue. When Mendes attacked us, he expected me to distance myself from you to protect the company. Helena smiled. Instead, I did the opposite. I embraced our relationship publicly, and you know what? It made me stronger, not weaker, I noticed, Eduardo said softly. It was remarkable to watch. Helena took a deep breath. I don't want to go back to living divided. Business Helena in one box, personal Helena in another. She reached for his hand. I want a life that integrates all parts of who I am, with you. Eduardo's eyes widened slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying... Helena slipped from her chair onto one knee, taking Eduardo completely by surprise. Eduardo Nogueira, will you marry me? Eduardo stared at her in shock before breaking into a joyous laugh. Helena Vasconcelos, are you proposing to me? I believe I am, she confirmed, suddenly nervous. Is that a problem? No, he assured her quickly. It's just, I had plans, involving a ring, which I've been carrying around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Now it was Helena's turn to be surprised. You were going to propose? Eduardo reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a simple but elegant diamond ring. I was waiting for the Mendes situation to resolve. I didn't want you to think I was rushing because of the pressure. Tears filled Helena's eyes. So, is that a yes? It's an absolute yes, Eduardo said firmly, pulling her up and into his arms. On one condition. What's that? That you wear my ring, not the other way around, he teased. I have some traditional values left. Helena laughed through her tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Deal. Their kiss sealed more than an engagement. It represented a new chapter for both of them. A life where truth, painful as it sometimes was, had ultimately strengthened rather than destroyed their bond. 6 months later, Helena stood in the garden of her countryside estate, surrounded by flowers and twinkling lights. In just moments, she would walk down the aisle to marry Eduardo. Her dress was elegant but simple, like the woman she had discovered herself to be beneath the corporate armor. Through the window of the guest house, she could see Eduardo's family chatting amicably with her closest friends. The divisions that had once seemed insurmountable had faded with time and understanding. Maria approached, her eyes misty. It's time, Ms. Vasconcelos. Helena, she corrected gently. Today, I'm just Helena. As the music began and she took her first steps toward her future, Helena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From suspicion to truth, from pain to healing, from isolation to connection. Eduardo waited for her at the altar, his face radiating joy and love. This was the man who had seen her, truly seen her beneath the wealth and power, the man who had stood beside her when it would have been easier to walk away. When she reached him, he whispered, "You look beautiful. You don't look so bad." "Yourself, Professor," she whispered back. As they exchanged vows before their friends and family, Helena thought about the painful truth that had nearly torn them apart. How Eduardo's silence that night at his family's home had broken her heart. How her own deception had compromised their trust. Yet here they stood, stronger for having faced those truths together, for choosing to rebuild rather than retreat. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and as Eduardo kissed her, cheers erupted from their guests. Helena felt a completeness she had never known before, not just loved for her success or her wealth, but for herself, all of herself. At the reception, Eduardo's father surprised everyone by giving a heartfelt toast. When my son first told us about Helena, I made assumptions based on what I thought I knew about wealthy people. I was wrong. He raised his glass. Helena has taught our family that true character isn't determined by bank accounts or social status, but by actions and integrity. Later, as they danced under the stars, Eduardo held Helena close. "Happy, Mrs. Nogueira?" She smiled up at him. "Deliriously. And it's Vasconcelos Nogueira, remember?" "Of course," he laughed. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As the evening wound down, Helena took a moment alone on the terrace, gazing at the celebration. From unlikely beginnings, a disguise, a painful revelation, a broken engagement, had come this beautiful reality. Eduardo joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about truth," Helena said softly. "How it can hurt but also heal. The truth that hurts," Eduardo translated her original revelation in Portuguese. "A verdade que machuca." "Yes," Helena agreed, turning in his arms, "but also the truth that saves, the truth that builds something real." Eduardo kissed her gently. "Our truth," as they rejoined their guests. Helena felt profound gratitude for that painful night of revelation months ago. The night she had discovered a truth that hurt, but ultimately had led her to the most authentic love she had ever known. A love built not on appearances or convenience or advantage, but on seeing and accepting each other, flaws and all. Aki, love strong enough to withstand any storm, including the truth itself. The end.